with the Gestapo. Okay, so I'm back in the village. There were many bombings there. One of them was by the Allies, and they were bombing a convoy during the middle of the night. It happened to be when my parents were there. I was with them in this one-room schoolhouse, and the Allies used to send flares down on parachutes to light up the countryside. And one of those flares, after it extinguished, it fell on our roof, and I could see the parachute over the edge of the window, and I was terrified. I woke up in the middle of the night to all the bombing, and I was very scared. But my parents reassured me that it would be okay. But there were so many scary moments. The next day, you remember the parachute? And what we did with it? The men of the town went up on the roof, and they brought the parachute down. And what did you do with the parachute material? She was a dressmaker, a seamstress. She made shirts out of the parachute for the people of the town.
Do you remember the war when the German Boy Scouts started to fight for the Nazis?
No, I don't know. No, I can only tell you my experiences. And we had no television in those days. We had newsreels, but I was not aware of it. So by the end of August 1944, the Allied troops were in the process of liberating France. And in September, the American troops were stationed in northern Africa, and they started invading southern France and freeing southern France from the Germans who were escaping north. And we often saw convoys of Germans moving in that direction from the windows of where I lived with these people. And so finally the troops were approaching. The weekend before that happened, my parents came to visit me. And my mother knew that we were going to be liberated. And it was shortly thereafter that I went back to them in Lyon. But she came up that weekend, and she had made me a French flag. The French flag is 3 stripes, red, white, and blue. And she made me such a flag out of cloths that she had made for her dresses. She brought me that flag, and during the next week when the American troops came to liberate us, they were down in the woods. Joe and I, we ran down the hill by the road, and we waved to them, and I waved my French flag, and they threw us Hershey bars. And you have I wrote a book about all of my experiences during the war. And I'll tell you about the book in a minute, but if you can focus on, this is the actual flag. That is one of my very few possessions that I have from my youth. All I have is a few books, a few pictures, and this flag. And this flag, I had it sealed into archival paper. It's framed, and it's in my home. And it's like over 60 years old. And it's a little holey with mothball holes, but this is the flag that means a lot to me. And so I waved the flag, they threw us Hershey bars, and very soon thereafter I went back to my parents. And I still went to school. Still didn't know I was Jewish, but all the bridges had been bombed. So you know how I got to school with other children? We went on a rowboat every day. Okay, so then my father had been able to get a job, but he and my mother thought we could do a lot better by going to Paris. So we left Lyon in 1944. We went to Paris. We went to live in a suburb just north of Paris, like the Bronx versus Manhattan, that type of distance. And my father was able to get a job. My mother continued with her dressmaking.
During the war, was your family's papers ever taken?
Yes, they were. Good question. In the city of Lyon, our papers were taken, and my mother had to go to the police station to try to retrieve them.
Oh, yeah.
So she
Schminked it and had a hat.
got all dressed up and makeup and a fancy hat, right? And you went into the police station, and what did you do? You pounded your fist and you demanded the papers? Because they said to you that we could not find records of your existence in the city of Lille, where our false papers said we were from. And what did you say to them about the bombing?
I said, so what? The city was in fire. They bombed it.
So all the records were destroyed.
I had a lot of chutzpah, if you know what that means. I had a lot of nerve to talk back. I say, how can you know anybody? Everything was burned up. And that's how I escaped.
Yeah, they gave us our papers back. They gave them to her. And she got away with it. And they were false papers, but throughout the whole war, my mother had a lot of, as she just said, chutzpah.
When you were talking about lack of privacy in your homes.
Wherever we lived, I never had my own room. When my parents lived in a very, very small apartment in Marseille, and then a slightly larger in Lyon and Paris, we had an alcove where my mother had a stand where she had rented a sewing machine to do her work. She had to sit on the bed, and they slept in the bed, and I slept on like a cot at the foot of the bed. And that happened everywhere we ever lived. We were always three to the room.
Did any
No
refugees ever come to your house and ask to stay with you because they had no home?
No, we had no. The only people who ever came, but we could not put them up because our place was too small, was in Marseille. One of my mother's sisters and her son and their son came to us, and they were able to get a similar apartment upstairs in the same house. But that's about it. Yeah. So we went to Paris, and we lived there. My parents had jobs. I went to school. I was a good student. Then in the war, okay, I should say something else very important. During 1940, 41, and 1942, for the first 3 years, my father wrote. He was a linguist. He was an educated man. He was a newspaper man, so he could write very well. He wrote letters to an uncle in New York City asking for help to get out. He asked for exit visas. He asked for money. We have very little money, but mainly he asked for help with getting us out.
And couldn't they help?
We never did.
Were any of these letters saved?
Yes. This uncle saved all of those letters. Let me continue with that. I'll get back to you. And then in 1942, the letters stopped because the Germans were not allowing any mail out. They were censoring letters. They were looking at all of the letters, opening them. So then in 1944, when we were liberated, my father wrote a letter to the uncle. They and others in the family who had survived, who that they had not heard from us in over 2 years. So he wrote a letter, and the first words of the letter, and these letters were all in French, said, "Dear Uncle Eli, they are still alive, meaning we were still alive.